The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Cannon City, Colorado. But Kyle Brandt barely flinched as he stood outside the saloon, watching his entire world crumble into ash and betrayal. It was September 1878, and the autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the high desert plains, casting long shadows across the wooden storefronts that lined Main Street. Kyle's hand trembled as he clutched the letter he had found that morning. The words seared into his mind like a branding iron pressed against his soul. His fiancée, Rebecca, had left him, not for another man from a neighboring town or some wealthy rancher passing through. She had left him for his own brother, Thomas. His younger brother, the one he had protected from schoolyard fights, taught to ride, defended against their father's harsh criticisms. The one person in the world he thought he could trust beyond all others. The wedding was supposed to be in 3 weeks. Kyle had spent the last 6 months building a small ranch house on the property he had purchased just outside town, every nail hammered with dreams of the life they would share. He had worked himself to exhaustion, breaking wild horses during the day and constructing their home by lamplight at night. The calluses on his hands were testaments to his devotion, each one a promise he had made to give her everything she deserved. Now those promises lay shattered like the whiskey bottle some drunk had thrown against the saloon wall the night before. Kyle walked slowly down the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He was 26 years old, tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with dark hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes no matter how many times he pushed it back. His jaw was strong, shadowed now with several days of stubble because he had not cared enough to shave since finding that damned letter. People stepped aside as he passed, some offering sympathetic glances, others quickly looking away. News traveled fast in a town of 1,500 people. The general store stood at the corner of 3rd and Main, its painted sign creaking slightly in the warm breeze. Kyle needed supplies for the ranch. Life continued even when your heart was torn from your chest, even when the woman you loved had chosen your own blood over you. The horses still needed feeding. The fences still needed mending. The world kept turning with cruel indifference. He pushed open the door, and the small bell above it announced his entrance with a cheerful jingle that felt obscene given his mood. The store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and the faint sweetness of peppermint sticks in a jar on the counter. Mrs. Henderson, the owner's wife, stood behind the register, her plump face creasing with concern when she saw him. "Kyle, dear," she began, her voice thick with pity. "Just need some supplies, Mrs. Henderson," Kyle interrupted, his voice rough. He could not bear anyone's sympathy right now. Sympathy would break whatever fragile control he still maintained. He moved through the narrow aisles, gathering what he needed: coffee, flour, salt, dried beans. His hands operated on instinct while his mind spiraled through memories he wished he could burn away. Rebecca's laugh when he had first asked her to dance at the church social 2 years ago, the way her blonde hair caught the sunlight. The softness in her blue eyes when she had said yes to his proposal on the bank of the Arkansas River, wildflowers blooming all around them in spring glory. He had thought she loved him. He had been so certain. "Excuse me," a soft voice said behind him, and Kyle stepped aside automatically, barely glancing at whoever had spoken. But then he did look, almost against his will. The woman was perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair pinned up in a practical style that still managed to be lovely. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green, like new leaves in spring, and there was something direct in her gaze that caught him off guard. She wore a simple calico dress in deep blue, dusty at the hem from travel, and carried herself with a quiet confidence he had rarely seen in women. Most of the ladies in Cannon City moved with either timid delicacy or the weary practicality of frontier life. This woman seemed different somehow. "Thank you," she said, reaching past him for a bag of cornmeal. Her sleeves were rolled up despite the impropriety, revealing tanned forearms that suggested she was no stranger to work. Kyle nodded and moved away, trying to return his focus to his own shopping, but he found himself aware of her presence in a way that surprised him. Perhaps it was simply that she was a stranger, someone who did not know his story, did not look at him with pity or judgment. In her eyes, he was just another person in a general store. He brought his supplies to the counter where Mrs. Henderson began tallying them up, her lips pressed together as if physically restraining herself from commenting on his situation. Kyle appreciated the effort even if he could see it cost her considerable self-control. The woman was known throughout Cannon City for knowing everyone's business. The auburn-haired woman approached the counter as Mrs. Henderson finished with Kyle. Up close, he could see faint freckles across her nose and cheeks, and a small scar on her chin that looked old and well-healed. She set down her items with efficient movements, then pulled a small leather purse from her pocket. "Are you new to Cannon City?" Mrs. Henderson asked her, unable to resist the pull of potential new information. "I arrived yesterday," the woman replied. Her voice had a pleasant quality, neither too high nor too soft. "I am looking for work, actually. I taught school back in Kansas, but I understand the position here is filled." "Oh yes, Miss Patterson has been our school teacher for 3 years now," Mrs. Henderson said, "but let me think. What other skills do you have, dear? I can keep books, write correspondence, manage household affairs. I am quite good with horses as well. My father ran a stable before he passed." Kyle found himself lingering by the door, pretending to check his supply list while listening. There was something compelling about this woman, though he could not quite identify what. Perhaps it was simply the steadiness in her voice, the lack of false sweetness or manipulation that he now associated with femininity, thanks to Rebecca's betrayal. "The Garrett Ranch might need help with their bookkeeping," Mrs. Henderson offered thoughtfully. "Old Mr. Garrett's eyes are not what they used to be, and his son is better with cattle than numbers." "I would be grateful for the introduction," the woman said. "My name is Margaret Norton, by the way. Pleased to meet you, Miss Norton. I am Mrs. Henderson. My husband and I run this store." Kyle pushed open the door, ready to leave, but paused when Mrs. Henderson called after him. "Kyle, dear, you are heading back to your ranch, are you not? Miss Norton is staying at the boarding house on 5th Street. The Garrett place is on your way. Would you mind giving her a ride out there? Save her the walk in this heat." Every instinct told Kyle to refuse. He wanted to be alone with his misery, not playing escort to some stranger. But years of ingrained courtesy and his mother's long-ago lessons about treating ladies properly made him turn back and nod stiffly. "I have a wagon outside," he said to Margaret, "if you do not mind the dust." "I have been walking through it all morning," Margaret replied with a slight smile. "A wagon would be a luxury. Thank you, Mr. Brandt, Kyle Brandt." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, so she had heard about him after all. Everyone in Cannon City probably knew the story by now, but to his surprise Margaret simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Mr. Brandt. Let me gather my things from the boarding house, and I will meet you at your wagon." They settled into an arrangement. Margaret returned 10 minutes later carrying a small carpet bag and wearing a simple bonnet to protect her face from the sun. Kyle helped her up onto the wagon seat with a brief touch of his hand to her elbow, then climbed up beside her and snapped the reins. His 2 horses, a matched pair of bays he had trained himself, started forward at an easy walk. Cannon City spread out around them as they headed west. The town had grown considerably in recent years, fueled by silver mining in the nearby mountains and the rich agricultural land along the Arkansas River Valley. The air was dry and clear, with the scent of sage and dust, and the distant smell of wood smoke from someone's chimney despite the warm day. Mountains rose blue and purple in the west, their peaks already touched with early snow that would not melt until next spring. They rode in silence for a while. Kyle appreciated that Margaret did not feel compelled to fill the quiet with meaningless chatter. The steady clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels created a rhythm that was almost soothing. Almost. "I heard what happened," Margaret said finally, when they had left the town behind and were traveling through open rangeland dotted with scrub brush and occasional cottonwood trees marking where water ran underground. "I am sorry. That must be incredibly painful." Kyle's jaw tightened. "News travels fast. Small towns are the same everywhere," Margaret said. There was no pity in her voice, just simple acknowledgement. "In Kansas, everyone knew when my father lost his business because of a dishonest partner. Everyone knew when my mother died of consumption. Everyone knew when my fiancé decided he would rather seek gold in California than marry me." Kyle glanced at her, surprised. She looked straight ahead, her profile calm and composed. "So I know something of betrayal," Margaret continued. "And I know how it feels when people look at you with pity, as if your pain is entertainment for their dull lives. I wanted you to know I was not offering empty platitudes." "How long ago?" Kyle asked after a moment. 2 years. He left 3 months before our wedding. Took our savings, which I had foolishly allowed him to manage." She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "I learned an important lesson about trust that day, which is that it must be earned through actions, not promised with words." Margaret turned to look at him then, and her green eyes were clear and direct. "Your brother and your fiancé betrayed you. That says everything about their character and nothing about your worth." Something in Kyle's chest loosened slightly at her words. Not much, but enough that he could take a deeper breath than he had managed in days. "Most people seem to think I must have driven her away somehow." "Most people are idiots," Margaret said bluntly, and Kyle found himself almost smiling despite everything. They rode on, and Kyle found himself telling her things he had not intended to share. About how he and Thomas had always been close growing up on their family's small ranch outside Denver. About how their parents had died in an influenza outbreak 5 years ago, leaving Kyle, as the eldest, responsible for settling their affairs. About how he had given Thomas half of everything even though the will had left it all to Kyle, because that was what brothers did. About how Thomas had come to Cannon City with him, helping him establish the horse ranch, sharing the work and the dreams. "He was my best friend," Kyle said, hearing the rawness in his own voice. "Rebecca was important, but Thomas was my brother. I would have died for him." "And he repaid you with the worst betrayal imaginable," Margaret said quietly. "I am truly sorry, Kyle." The use of his first name should have felt too familiar, but somehow it did not. There was something about Margaret that invited honesty, that made pretense seem unnecessary. The Garrett Ranch came into view, a sprawling operation with several barns and a large main house built of logs and stone. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Kyle could see several ranch hands working with horses in a corral near one of the barns. He guided the wagon up the long drive and pulled to a stop near the house. An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. This was Daniel Garrett, the son Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. He was perhaps 40, weathered and lean, with gray streaking his brown hair. "Kyle," Daniel called in greeting. "What brings you by?" "I have a passenger for you," Kyle said, climbing down and then helping Margaret descend from the wagon. Miss Margaret Norton, Mrs. Henderson thought you might need help with bookkeeping. Daniel's weathered face broke into a smile. Mrs. Henderson would be right about that. My father's ledgers are a disaster and I am not much better. You know numbers, Miss Norton? I do, Margaret said confidently. I managed the books for my father's stable business for 5 years, and I have experience with inventory, payroll, and tax documentation. Sounds like you are more qualified than I have any right to hope for, Daniel said. Come inside and we will discuss terms. Margaret retrieved her carpet bag from the wagon, then turned to Kyle. Thank you for the ride, Mr. Brandt. I appreciate your kindness. Just Kyle is fine, he found himself saying, and you are welcome. He watched her follow Daniel into the house, then climbed back onto the wagon and headed toward his own property. His ranch was another 3 miles west, tucked into a small valley where a creek provided reliable water year-round. He had chosen the location carefully, thinking of the children he and Rebecca would have, the life they would build. The house stood half-finished when he arrived, raw lumber and empty windows staring like accusatory eyes. Kyle unhitched the horses and led them to the barn he had completed first, because practical matters had to come before dreams. He fed and watered them, checked on the 6 other horses currently in his training string, and then stood in the barn doorway watching the sun sink lower in the western sky. He did not want to go into that empty house. Did not want to see the bedroom furniture he had built with such care, the kitchen table where he had imagined family meals, the rocking chair he had crafted for Rebecca to use when she nursed their babies. All of it mocked him now with possibilities that would never come to pass. So instead, Kyle grabbed a hammer and nails and began working on the house's exterior walls, driving nails with vicious force until his arms ached and sweat poured down his back despite the cooling evening air. Physical pain was easier to bear than the emotional kind. At least he understood it. He worked until darkness made it impossible to continue, then finally went inside. The house had a completed kitchen and bedroom, both sparsely furnished. Kyle ate a cold dinner of bread and cheese because he could not muster the energy to cook, then lay down on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and full of dreams that felt like betrayals all over again. The next weeks passed in a haze of work. Kyle threw himself into training horses with almost desperate intensity, spending long hours in the corral working with the half-wild Mustangs he had purchased from a local rancher. The horses provided honest companionship. They did not lie. They did not pretend affection they did not feel. They either trusted you or they did not, and you earned that trust through patience and consistency. He saw Margaret Norton occasionally when he went into town for supplies or when he delivered a trained horse to the Garrett Ranch. She had taken the position as their bookkeeper and apparently was also helping Mrs. Garrett with household management. The older woman's arthritis had been getting worse, and Margaret's assistance had been a blessing according to Daniel Garrett. Each time Kyle saw her, they exchanged pleasantries, sometimes a few words about the weather or the horses. Margaret never asked him how he was healing from Rebecca's betrayal. She never offered unwanted advice. She simply treated him like a normal person, and Kyle found himself grateful for that small mercy. October arrived with cooler temperatures, and the cottonwood trees along the creek turning brilliant gold. Kyle completed the exterior of his house and began work on the interior details, though the project had lost much of its urgency. He worked steadily, but without the driving passion that had once fueled his hammer. On a bright Thursday morning, he was in town at the feed store when he saw them. Thomas and Rebecca walking down Main Street together. Rebecca wore a new dress Kyle had never seen, deep green with black trim, and she was laughing at something Thomas said. His brother had his hand on the small of her back, possessive and casual all at once. Kyle froze. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, pure rage whited out his vision. They looked happy. Content. As if they had not destroyed someone to find their joy. Thomas saw him. For just an instant, guilt flashed across his younger brother's face, but then Rebecca tugged on his arm and they turned down a side street, disappearing from view. Running away like cowards. Kyle stood rooted to the spot, breathing hard, his heart pounding so fiercely it hurt. People were staring again. He could feel their eyes, hear their whispered comments. The rage transformed into something worse: humiliation, burning and acidic. He abandoned his errand and walked quickly back to where he had tied his horse, needing to escape the town and all its judging eyes. But as he untied the reins, he heard a familiar voice. Kyle. He turned to find Margaret standing a few feet away, a basket over her arm. She must have been coming from the bakery because he could smell fresh bread. I saw, she said simply. I do not need your pity, Kyle said, more harshly than he intended. Good, because I am not offering it. Margaret stepped closer, her green eyes serious. I am offering to buy you coffee at the restaurant. You look like you could use a friend. I should get back to the ranch. The ranch will be there in an hour. Come on. Without waiting for his agreement, Margaret turned and walked toward the small restaurant on 4th Street. Kyle hesitated, then found himself following her, leading his horse. He tied the animal outside the restaurant and followed Margaret inside. The place was nearly empty at mid-morning, just a few older men nursing coffee and discussing politics in the corner. Margaret chose a table by the window and settled into a chair with easy confidence. Kyle sat across from her, feeling awkward and raw. The owner, a jovial man named Mr. Chen who had come from China during the railroad construction years, came over with a coffee pot. Miss Norton, Mr. Brandt. Coffee, please, Margaret said, and 2 slices of your apple pie if you have any left from yesterday. For you always, Mr. Chen said with a warm smile, pouring their coffee before disappearing into the kitchen. I did not say I wanted pie, Kyle said. You need pie, trust me on this. Margaret added sugar to her coffee and stirred it slowly. The first time I saw my former fiancé after he abandoned me, I wanted to burn down the world. I went home and cried for 3 hours, then ate an entire cake my neighbor had brought over. I was sick for a day afterward, but in that moment it helped. I am not going to cry, Kyle said stiffly. I know. Men are not allowed that relief, are they? You are just supposed to be angry and stoic and pretend you are made of iron. She sipped her coffee, looking at him over the rim of the cup. But iron rusts when it is never properly tended, Kyle. Mr. Chen returned with 2 generous slices of pie, the crust golden and flaky, the apples fragrant with cinnamon. Kyle picked up his fork mechanically and took a bite. It was excellent, but he barely tasted it. You know what the worst part is, he found himself saying. Not that she chose him, not even that he betrayed me. It is that I feel like a fool. How did I not see it? How long were they sneaking around behind my back while I was building that damned house and planning our future? Because you loved them and trusted them, Margaret said. Because you are a decent person who assumed others would behave with basic decency. That is not foolishness, Kyle. That is honor. They are the ones who should feel shame. They looked happy. Happiness built on betrayal never lasts, Margaret said firmly. They will spend the rest of their lives knowing what they are capable of. Every time your brother looks at her, he will remember that he stole her from his own brother. Every time she looks at him, she will know she broke her promises. That poison will seep into everything eventually. Kyle wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. What if it does not? What if they really do love each other and live happily ever after? Then you will still be better off without them. Margaret set down her fork and leaned forward slightly. Do you want to know what I learned after my fiancé left? I learned that I had been settling. I had been so focused on following the expected path, getting married and having a home, that I never stopped to ask if he was truly the right person. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I ignored. The casual cruelties, the way he diminished my opinions, the times he flirted with other women right in front of me while I told myself it meant nothing. Rebecca was never cruel, Kyle said, but even as he spoke, he wondered if that was entirely true. There had been moments. Times when she had criticized his ambitions, suggested he should be more like Thomas, who knew how to charm people instead of just working hard. Times when she had seemed disappointed in him for reasons he could not understand. Perhaps not cruel, Margaret said, but was she truly kind? Did she see you, Kyle, the real you with all your strengths and flaws? Did she love you for who you are or for what you could provide? The question struck something deep inside him. Kyle sat back, his pie forgotten. He thought about his relationship with Rebecca, really examined it for the first time without the blinding overlay of what he had wanted it to be. She had loved the idea of the ranch, the security it represented. She had loved being admired as the fiancée of an up-and-coming horse rancher. But had she ever asked him about his dreams beyond their practical applications? Had she ever been interested in his thoughts, his fears, his hopes? Thomas, on the other hand, was charming and easy. He told stories that made people laugh. He had always been the one Rebecca smiled most brightly for at social gatherings. I think, Kyle said slowly, I have been mourning something that was never quite real. That does not make the pain any less valid, Margaret said gently. You still lost your brother's loyalty. You still had your trust shattered. Those wounds are real, Kyle. Give yourself permission to heal from them. They sat in the restaurant for over an hour, talking about betrayal and healing, about small towns and big dreams, about the ways people surprised you for both good and ill. Kyle found himself relaxing in Margaret's presence in a way he had not experienced with anyone since his parents died. She did not try to fix him or offer false comfort. She just listened and shared her own experiences with honest directness. When they finally left, Kyle felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but the first faint possibility of it, like a crack in a dam that might eventually let the poison behind it drain away. Thank you, he said to Margaret as they stood outside the restaurant. For the coffee and the conversation. You are welcome, and Kyle, she touched his arm briefly. You are going to be all right. I know it does not feel like it now, but you will. He watched her walk away with her basket of bread, then untied his horse and rode back toward his ranch. The sky was huge and blue overhead, stretching endlessly in all directions. Colorado sky, big enough to contain both heartbreak and hope. Over the following weeks, Kyle found himself seeking out Margaret's company more often. He would time his trips to town to coincide with her lunch hour, and they would share a meal at Mr. Chen's restaurant. Or he would volunteer to deliver messages to the Garrett Ranch, knowing he might see her there. She seemed to welcome his presence without making a fuss about it, and gradually their conversations deepened. Margaret told him about growing up in Kansas, about her father's love of horses, and how she had learned to handle even the most difficult animals. She spoke of her mother with obvious affection, describing a woman who had read poetry and believed strongly in education and equality. And she shared stories of her failed engagement with wry humor that never quite hid the hurt underneath. In return, Kyle found himself opening up in ways he had never done with Rebecca. He told Margaret about the guilt he carried over his parents' deaths, how he had been away at a horse auction when the influenza struck and had not made it back in time to say goodbye. He confessed his doubts about whether he was truly capable of running a successful ranch, whether he had the business sense to match his skill with horses. He even admitted his fear that he was somehow fundamentally unlovable, that Rebecca had simply seen something lacking in him that made her turn to Thomas instead. "That is absolute nonsense," Margaret said firmly when he voiced that last fear. They were sitting by the creek on his property on a late October afternoon, watching the water flow past. Margaret had ridden out to bring him some ledgers from Daniel Garrett regarding a horse purchase, and Kyle had invited her to stay for coffee. "You are loyal, hardworking, honest, and kind. Those qualities are rare and valuable. If Rebecca could not appreciate them, the failure is hers, not yours." "You barely know me," Kyle pointed out, though her words warmed something in his chest. "I know you well enough to see your character," Margaret replied. "I have watched how you treat your horses, with patience and respect. I have heard how you speak about your brother despite his betrayal with pain, yes, but not with vicious hatred. I have noticed how you tip your hat to every woman you pass on the street, regardless of her age or social standing. Character reveals itself in small actions, Kyle, and yours is solid." Kyle looked at her, really looked at her in the golden afternoon light. Margaret Norton was not a conventional beauty like Rebecca with her delicate features and fashionable dresses. But there was something compelling about Margaret's directness, the intelligence in her green eyes, the capable set of her shoulders. She was beautiful in an entirely different way, like the Colorado landscape, itself strong and honest and enduring. "You have done me considerable good these past weeks," he said quietly. "I do not think I have properly thanked you for that." "You do not need to thank me for friendship," Margaret said. "That is freely given." But it was becoming more than friendship, Kyle realized. He looked forward to seeing her with an anticipation that went beyond mere companionship. He noticed small details, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the slight upward curve of her lips when something amused her, the grace of her hands when she worked with horses at the Garrett Ranch. He found himself wanting to make her smile, to earn her good opinion, to be near her. The realization did not come with the overwhelming passion he had felt with Rebecca. This was different, steadier. Like a foundation being built stone by solid stone rather than a bonfire that burned bright and fast. But the timing felt wrong. How could he trust these feelings when his heart was still bruised from betrayal? What if he was just looking for someone to fill the void Rebecca had left? That would not be fair to Margaret, who deserved genuine affection, not the desperate need of a wounded man seeking comfort. So Kyle said nothing, and tried to ignore the way his pulse quickened when Margaret laughed, or the protective surge he felt when he saw other men looking at her with appreciation. November brought the first real cold, with frost coating the ground most mornings, and the creek icing over at the edges. Kyle finished the interior of his house, taking grim satisfaction in completing what he had started even if the original purpose was gone. The place was comfortable now, with a good stove, sturdy furniture, and tight windows that kept out the wind. It was not the dream home he had once imagined, but it was solid and practical. Much like himself, he supposed, he was in town buying winter supplies when he encountered Thomas again. This time he was alone, coming out of the land office. The brothers nearly collided on the wooden sidewalk. They both stopped, frozen in uncomfortable proximity. This close, Kyle could see that Thomas looked strained, with dark circles under his eyes and new lines around his mouth. His younger brother had always been handsome in an easy, charming way, but now he looked older and worn. "Kyle," Thomas said, his voice hesitant, "I have been hoping to talk to you." I have nothing to say to you, Kyle replied, moving to step around him. Thomas caught his arm. Please, just listen for a minute. Kyle looked pointedly at the hand on his arm until Thomas released him, but he did not walk away. I know you hate me, Thomas began, the words tumbling out quickly as if he feared he would not get them all said. And you have every right to. What I did was unforgivable. But Kyle, I need you to understand I did not mean for it to happen. Rebecca and I, we tried to fight it. We knew it was wrong. You did not try very hard, Kyle said coldly. No, Thomas admitted, his shoulders slumping. We did not, and I am sorry. You are my brother, and I betrayed you in the worst possible way. I have to live with that. Is that why you look so terrible? Guilt keeping you awake? Thomas flinched. Some, but also because I am realizing that what Rebecca and I have, it is not what I thought it would be. We got caught up in something passionate and forbidden, and we convinced ourselves it was true love. But now that the excitement is fading, I am seeing that maybe we made a terrible mistake. Kyle felt no satisfaction in hearing this, only a weary sort of sadness. What do you want from me, Thomas? Forgiveness. I do not have that to give you. Permission to come crawling back. You made your choice. I just wanted you to know I am sorry, Thomas said quietly, and that I miss my brother. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I had to tell you anyway. You are right, Kyle said. You do not deserve it, and you are going to have to live with what you have done, just like I have to live with what was done to me. He stepped around Thomas and walked away, his heart pounding but his steps steady. He found himself heading to the Garrett ranch without consciously deciding to go there. He needed to see Margaret, to be in the presence of someone honest and true. Someone who had not betrayed him. He found her in the ranch office, bent over a large ledger with a pencil in hand. She looked up when he knocked on the door frame, and her expression shifted from concentration to concern when she saw his face. What happened? She asked, setting down her pencil. Kyle told her about the encounter with Thomas, about his brother's apology and admission of regret. Margaret listened without interrupting, her green eyes serious and attentive. How do you feel? She asked when he finished. I am not sure, Kyle admitted. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, suddenly exhausted. Part of me wanted to hear him say he was suffering. Wanted proof that betrayal has consequences, but now that I have heard it, I just feel empty. That is normal, Margaret said. Vindication rarely feels as satisfying as we imagine it will. The damage is already done. His regret does not undo it. You think I should forgive him? Eventually, I mean. He is still my brother. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I think forgiveness is complicated, she finally said. There is forgiveness that means releasing your own anger so it does not poison you. And there is forgiveness that means reconciliation, trust restored. You may be able to achieve the first someday, but the second may not be possible. Some betrayals are too deep. I do not think I can ever trust him again, Kyle said. Then that is your answer. You can wish him well from a distance and work on letting go of your anger for your own sake. But you do not owe him a relationship, Kyle. You do not owe him access to your life. Her words settled something in Kyle. He had been carrying a low-level guilt about his inability to forgive, as if his continued anger made him somehow petty or small. But Margaret was right. He could work on releasing the poison of hatred without having to reconcile with the people who had hurt him. Thank you, he said. You always seem to know exactly what I need to hear. Margaret smiled slightly. I've had a lot of practice thinking about these things. When my fiancé left, I spent months wondering if I should give him another chance if he came back. I rehearsed imaginary conversations where he apologized and I nobly forgave him. But you know what? He never came back, and eventually I realized I did not want him to. I was better off without someone who could abandon me so easily. "Are you better off?" Kyle asked, genuinely curious. "Are you happier now than you would have been married to him?" "Yes," Margaret said without hesitation. "I was devastated at first, lost. I had built my entire future around a life with him, and suddenly that future vanished. But once I started building a new future, one that I chose for myself rather than following the expected path, I found a freedom I had never experienced before. I came to Colorado. I took a job I find fulfilling. I make my own decisions. And I do not have to compromise my values or diminish myself to make a man feel important." "You deserve someone who appreciates you," Kyle said, and was surprised by the intensity in his own voice. Margaret looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. Kyle became acutely aware of the small space, the quiet of the office, the way the afternoon light came through the window and touched her hair with gold. "So do you," Margaret said softly. They held each other's gaze, and Kyle felt the world narrow to just the two of them. He wanted to reach across the desk and take her hand, wanted to tell her that he thought about her constantly, that she had become the best part of his days, that somewhere in the process of healing he had started falling in love with her. But fear held him back. Fear that it was too soon, that he was not ready, that he would somehow damage this precious thing between them by moving too fast. The moment broke when Daniel Garrett's voice called from somewhere outside, and Margaret looked away, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "I should let you get back to work," Kyle said, standing up. "Kyle," Margaret said as he reached the door. He turned back. "I am glad you came here today. You do not have to face difficult things alone." "I am starting to learn that," he said, and meant it. Winter settled over Cannon City with determination. Snow fell in heavy blankets, transforming the landscape into something stark and beautiful. Kyle spent his days caring for his horses, keeping them fed and sheltered through the cold months. The work was demanding but satisfying, and he found himself content in a way he had not expected. He saw Margaret regularly through the winter. When the roads were passable, he would ride into town or out to the Garrett ranch. When the snow was too deep, they exchanged letters, Margaret's neat handwriting filling pages with observations about the ranch, thoughts on books she was reading, and questions about horse training that showed genuine interest in his work. Kyle found himself writing back with an enthusiasm he had never felt for correspondence before. He told her about each of his horses, describing their personalities and quirks. He shared his plans for expanding the ranch in the spring, his hopes of breeding his best mare to a good stallion. He even sent her a sketch he had drawn of a new barn design, apologizing for his rough artistic skills, but wanting her opinion nonetheless. Her response came back warmly enthusiastic about his plans and full of practical suggestions. She had a good head for business, he realized, with ideas about marketing his training services to the growing number of ranches in the area. On Christmas, the Garretts hosted a gathering for their ranch hands and close friends, and they invited both Kyle and Margaret. Kyle arrived at dusk, riding through snow that sparkled in the lamplight spilling from the windows. Inside, the house was warm and festive, with pine boughs decorating the mantel and the scent of roasted turkey filling the air. Margaret wore a dress he had not seen before, deep burgundy that brought out the richness of her auburn hair. She had let it down from its usual practical style, and it fell in waves past her shoulders. Kyle felt his breath catch when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. Margaret's cheeks colored prettily. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They spent the evening in easy companionship, eating the excellent meal Mrs. Garrett had prepared and listening to Daniel tell stories about previous wild winters. Other guests included several ranch hands, the local doctor and his wife, and the minister who served the small church in town. It was a warm, convivial gathering, and Kyle realized he was genuinely enjoying himself. He was not faking pleasure or forcing sociability. He was actually happy. After dinner, someone produced a fiddle and cleared space for dancing. Kyle, who had not danced since before Rebecca's betrayal, found himself asking Margaret if she would honor him. "I would be delighted," she said, placing her hand in his. They moved into the simple pattern of the waltz, and Kyle was intensely aware of the warmth of Margaret's hand in his, the slight pressure of his other hand at her waist, the way she moved with natural grace. She fit against him perfectly, her height complementing his own. "This is nice," Margaret said as they turned together. "I have not danced in a long time." "Neither have I," Kyle admitted. "I forgot how much I enjoyed it." They danced several sets, and Kyle found himself reluctant to let her go each time the music ended. Other men asked Margaret to dance as well. Daniel Garrett, the doctor, one of the younger ranch hands who blushed furiously while extending his invitation. Kyle watched them with a strange feeling in his chest that he recognized, after a moment, as jealousy. He had no right to feel possessive of Margaret. They were friends. Good friends, but still just friends, except he wanted more. He knew that now with crystalline clarity. He wanted the right to hold her hand without the excuse of a dance. Wanted to kiss her, to wake up beside her, to build a future with her. He wanted everything. Late in the evening, Kyle and Margaret found themselves alone on the front porch, taking a break from the warmth and noise inside. The night was cold but clear, with stars scattered across the black sky like diamond dust. Their breath plumed white in the frigid air. "I have been thinking," Kyle began, then stopped, suddenly nervous. He had faced down wild horses and harsh frontier conditions without flinching, but the thought of exposing his heart to potential rejection made his palms sweat despite the cold. "About what?" Margaret asked, looking at him with those clear green eyes. "About you, about us." Kyle took a breath. "Margaret, these past months with you have meant more to me than I can properly express. You have helped me heal from something I thought might destroy me. You have been honest and kind and strong. And somewhere along the way, I stopped just being grateful for your friendship and started wanting more." Margaret's expression was unreadable in the dim light from the window. "More. I think I am falling in love with you," Kyle said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know the timing is not ideal. I know I am probably still healing and maybe I should wait longer to be sure. But I also know that what I feel for you is different from anything I have felt before. It is steady and real and true. You are steady and real and true, and I wanted you to know." For a long moment, Margaret was silent and Kyle's heart sank. He had miscalculated. He had misread the situation. She was going to let him down gently and their friendship would become awkward and strained. But then Margaret smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through winter clouds. "I was hoping you would say something like that," she said softly. "Because I have been falling in love with you too, Kyle Brandt. I have been trying to be patient, trying to give you the time and space you needed to heal. But every time I see you, it gets harder to pretend I only feel friendship." "Really?" Kyle asked, almost disbelieving. "Really?" Margaret stepped closer, and Kyle could feel the warmth of her despite the cold air between them. "You are everything I did not know I needed. You are genuine and hardworking and emotionally honest. You treat me like an equal. You listen when I speak. You value my opinions. Do you know how rare that is?" Kyle reached out and took her hands in his, marveling at how right it felt. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right, Margaret. No rushing, no mistakes. I want to earn your trust and your love." "You already have," Margaret said. "But I would not mind some proper courting anyway." They stood there on the porch, hands clasped, smiling at each other like fools while the cold tried unsuccessfully to reach them. Then Kyle leaned down slowly, giving Margaret plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Instead, she rose on her toes to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that was sweet and gentle and full of promise. It was nothing like the passionate, desperate kisses Kyle had shared with Rebecca. This was better. This was a beginning rather than a flame burning too hot and fast. This was something that could last. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret was smiling so brightly that Kyle felt his heart might burst with happiness. "I should probably take you back inside before you freeze," he said reluctantly. "Probably," Margaret agreed, but neither of them moved for another long moment, too content to break the spell. The winter passed with a sweetness Kyle had never experienced before. He courted Margaret with old-fashioned determination, bringing her flowers he had to ride miles to find, taking her on sleigh rides through the snow-covered landscape, writing her letters that were probably too earnest but seemed to delight her anyway. Margaret responded with equal enthusiasm, bringing him books she thought he would enjoy, helping him plan improvements to his ranch, and teaching him a complicated card game her father had loved. They talked about everything. Their pasts, their dreams, their fears and hopes. Kyle told her about the guilt he still sometimes felt over his parents' deaths, and Margaret shared her lingering sadness over losing her mother so young. They discussed philosophy and religion, horses and books, the future of the West and their own small place in it, and they kissed. Carefully, respectfully, but with growing passion. Kyle was intensely aware that Margaret was a proper young lady and he would not dishonor her, but every touch of her hand, every brush of her lips against his, built a fire inside him that spoke of a future he desperately wanted. In February, Kyle asked Margaret to marry him. He did it without fanfare, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when she came to visit his ranch. They were in the barn, and Margaret was petting his best mare, murmuring softly to the horse, when Kyle realized he could not wait any longer. "Margaret," he said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. "I know we have only been courting for 2 months. I know traditional wisdom would say we should wait longer, but I am absolutely certain of what I feel for you. I love you. I trust you. I want to build a life with you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Kyle, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring all his love and commitment into the embrace. The mare snorted softly beside them, unimpressed by human dramatics, and they both laughed. "When?" Margaret asked when they finally pulled apart. "As soon as possible," Kyle said. "Unless you want a big wedding with lots of planning, I want to be your wife," Margaret said firmly. "Everything else is just details." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Cannon City. The ceremony was simple, attended by the Garretts, Mrs. Henderson and her husband, Mr. Chen, the minister, and a handful of others who had become friends over the winter. Margaret wore a lovely cream-colored dress that Mrs. Garrett had helped her sew, and Kyle wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed for once. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Kyle tensed slightly, half expecting Thomas and Rebecca to burst in with dramatic protests. But the church remained quiet and the moment passed. Those people were part of his past. Margaret was his future. "I, Kyle, take you, Margaret, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said when the time came, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you, to honor you, to stand by you in good times and bad. I promise to be honest with you always, to respect you as my equal partner, and to build a life with you based on trust and true affection. These promises I make freely and without reservation." Margaret's vows in return brought tears to his eyes. She promised to love him, to support his dreams, to be his companion and friend. Her voice never wavered, her green eyes locked on his, and Kyle felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kyle kissed Margaret with such tenderness that Mrs. Henderson actually sighed audibly from the front pew. They held a small reception at Mr. Chen's restaurant, which he had closed for the afternoon, so they could celebrate privately. The food was excellent, the company warm, and Kyle felt a happiness so complete it was almost frightening in its intensity. He kept glancing at Margaret, his wife, marveling at the reality of it. She would catch his eye and smile, and the whole world seemed right. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to leave with congratulations and good wishes. Finally, Kyle and Margaret were able to depart, riding together on his wagon back to the ranch that was now their shared home. "Are you nervous?" Kyle asked as they traveled through the late afternoon sunlight. "A little," Margaret admitted, "but mostly I am happy, excited, grateful." "Me too," Kyle said. He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I never thought I would feel this way again. After Rebecca, I thought I was done with love and trust. But you taught me that real love is different from what I experienced before. Real love does not betray." "No," Margaret agreed softly. "It does not. Real love is steadfast. It is built on honesty and respect and genuine affection. It is what we have, Kyle." They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Kyle helped Margaret down from the wagon, but instead of heading inside, he swept her up in his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "Kyle Brandt, what are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning. "It is tradition." "We have not even reached the door yet," Margaret pointed out, but she wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her. Kyle kicked open the front door and carried Margaret inside the house he had built with broken dreams, but now got to fill with real ones. He set her down gently in the front room, and they stood together, looking around at their home. Kyle had spent the past week making the place as welcoming as possible. Fresh curtains on the windows, wildflowers in a vase on the table despite the difficulty of finding them in early March, and the good quilt his mother had made draped over the bed in their room. It was not fancy, but it was clean and comfortable and full of promise. "It is perfect," Margaret said, reading his thoughts as she so often seemed to do. She turned to him, her face soft in the fading light. "We are going to be so happy here, Kyle." He kissed her then, a kiss that quickly deepened into something more. They made their way to the bedroom, helping each other out of their wedding clothes with a mixture of tenderness and growing urgency. Kyle had been intimate with Rebecca during their engagement, moments he now regretted as cheap imitations of what intimacy should be. This was different. This was two people who had chosen each other with full knowledge and commitment, two people who would be together for the rest of their lives. Margaret was beautiful in the lamplight, her auburn hair loose and flowing over her shoulders, her skin pale and soft. Kyle worshipped her with his hands and lips, learning what made her gasp and sigh, taking his time despite the fire in his blood. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces that had been searching and finally found where they belonged. Afterward, they lay tangled together under his mother's quilt, Margaret's head on Kyle's chest, his arm around her shoulders. Kyle felt a peace so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," Margaret replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "So very much." They fell asleep like that. Two people who had both known betrayal and pain, who had found each other in the aftermath and chosen to build something true and lasting. Life settled into a rhythm over the following months. Margaret proved to be a natural partner in every way. She helped Kyle with the ranch work, handling the horses with a skill that came from her father's training. She managed their finances with careful attention, making sure they saved money and invested wisely in growing their operation. And she made their house into a true home, filling it with laughter and warmth, and the kind of comfort that made Kyle eager to return every evening. They worked side by side breaking horses for the growing number of clients who sought out Kyle's training services. His reputation had spread, and ranchers from all over the region brought their difficult horses to him. Margaret often assisted, her calm presence helping to settle nervous animals. Together, they were more effective than Kyle had ever been alone. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day or reading aloud from books, or sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence that came with deep familiarity. Kyle had never been happier. He occasionally saw Thomas and Rebecca in town. Each time hurt a little less. Not because he forgave them exactly, but because his life was so full of genuine love and contentment that their betrayal seemed less significant in comparison. They had freed him to find something better, even if that had not been their intention. Thomas always looked away when they encountered each other, his guilt apparently not fading with time. Rebecca, Kyle noticed, looked increasingly unhappy. There was a tightness around her mouth, a dissatisfaction in her eyes. Margaret had been right. Happiness built on betrayal did not last. One day in late May, Kyle was in town picking up supplies when Thomas approached him directly, something he had not done since their confrontation months earlier. "Kyle," Thomas said hesitantly, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Kyle considered refusing but found he no longer had the energy for active hostility. "All right." They walked to the edge of town, away from listening ears. Thomas looked haggard, Kyle noticed. His younger brother had lost weight, and there was something defeated in the set of his shoulders. "I wanted you to know that Rebecca and I are leaving," Thomas said. "We are going to California. She has family there." "I hope you find what you are looking for," Kyle said, and meant it without bitterness. "Kyle, I need to tell you something. I need you to know that you were right. What Rebecca and I did, the way we hurt you, it poisoned everything between us. We thought what we felt was true love, but it was just selfishness and lust disguised as something noble. Every time I look at her, I remember how I betrayed you, and I think she feels the same about me. We make each other miserable." "Then why stay together?" Kyle asked. "Because we destroyed everything else for this," Thomas said tiredly. "We might as well see it through, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry. Not because things did not work out the way I hoped, but because I hurt you. You are my brother, and I should have protected you, not betrayed you. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I needed to say it." Kyle looked at his brother, this person he had once loved more than anyone, and felt only a distant sadness. "I appreciate you telling me. And I hope California gives you both a chance to start fresh, to be better people than you were here." "I saw you with your wife," Thomas said. "Margaret, you look happy together, really happy." "I am," Kyle said simply. "She is everything I did not know I needed. She is honest and loyal and true. She taught me what real love actually looks like." "I am glad you found that," Thomas said. "You deserve it, much more than I do." He held out his hand. "Goodbye, Kyle. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I hope someday you can think of me without hating me." Kyle looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then took it briefly. "I do not hate you, Thomas. I pity you, because you will spend the rest of your life knowing what you are capable of, and that is a harder punishment than anything I could inflict. Goodbye." He turned and walked back toward the center of town, leaving Thomas standing alone. Kyle felt something release in his chest, some final knot of anger and pain loosening at last. He was truly free of them now. He found Margaret at the general store, examining fabric for new curtains. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up in the way that never failed to make his heart skip. That smile was his, given freely and without reservation. Real love, Kyle had learned, was that simple and that profound. "Ready to go home?" Margaret asked, tucking her arm through his. "Always," Kyle said, and meant it in every possible way. Summer arrived in full glory, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the creek running high with snowmelt from the mountains. The ranch thrived under their joint care. Kyle and Margaret worked hard, but they also made time for joy. They rode together through the hills, held picnics by the creek, and danced in their kitchen to music only they could hear. In July, Margaret told Kyle she was pregnant. She said it one evening after supper, her hands folded in front of her, a mixture of happiness and nervousness in her expression. Kyle stared at her for a moment, the words not quite registering. Then a grin spread across his face so wide it almost hurt. A baby, Margaret confirmed, and then laughed as Kyle swept her up and spun her around before carefully setting her back down. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working with the horses?" The questions tumbled out in a rush. "I am fine," Margaret said, laughing. "I am healthy and strong, and women have been doing this since the beginning of time. But yes, we should probably be a bit more careful with the heavier work." Kyle placed his hand gently on her stomach, which showed no sign of change yet. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Our baby," Margaret agreed, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Margaret continued to help with the ranch work, though Kyle was constantly anxious about her overexerting herself. She bore his worry with patient amusement, assuring him that she felt wonderful and that physical activity was actually good for her and the baby. As her belly grew round and obvious, Kyle found himself increasingly protective and tender. He would place his hand on her stomach to feel the baby move, marveling at each kick and flutter. He built a beautiful cradle from cedar wood, sanding it to silky smoothness so there would be no risk of splinters. Margaret sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face soft with anticipation. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would give this child. Kyle wanted to teach their son or daughter about horses, to pass on the skills his own father had taught him. Margaret wanted to make sure their child learned to read early and developed a love of learning. "Boy or girl, I hope they have your eyes," Kyle said one evening, his hand resting on Margaret's belly. "And your kindness," Margaret replied, leaning against him. "Your loyalty and good heart." "Our child is going to be so loved," Kyle said. "I promise you that, Margaret. I am going to be the best father I can be." "I know you will," Margaret said, kissing him softly. "You are already a wonderful husband. I have no doubt you will be an equally wonderful father." In February, on a cold night with snow falling thick and fast outside, Margaret went into labor. Kyle had arranged ahead of time for Dr. Morrison to attend the birth, and he also brought in Mrs. Garrett, who had helped deliver many babies over the years. The labor was long and difficult. Kyle paced the front room, listening to Margaret's cries from the bedroom and feeling utterly helpless. He had faced down wild horses and brutal weather, but nothing had prepared him for the terror of knowing Margaret was in pain, and he could do nothing to help her. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn baby. Kyle's heart leaped into his throat. Mrs. Garrett emerged from the bedroom a few moments later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she said, "and Margaret is fine, tired but fine. Come meet your boy." Kyle entered the bedroom on shaky legs. Margaret lay propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the soft blankets she had made. Kyle approached slowly, almost reverently. "Meet our son," Margaret said softly, tilting the baby so Kyle could see his face. Kyle looked down at the tiny, red, scrunched-up face of his child and felt his entire world shift. The baby had a fuzz of dark hair and was waving one miniature fist in the air as if protesting his arrival into this cold world. Kyle reached out with one finger and touched the impossibly small hand. Immediately, tiny fingers wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Kyle whispered, his voice breaking. "Margaret, he is perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Margaret asked. Kyle nodded, unable to speak. Margaret carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the tiny head. Kyle held his son with infinite care, looking down into the small face with awe. "Hello," he said softly. "I am your father, and I promise you I am going to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are going to grow up knowing you are wanted and valued. You are going to know what real love looks like because your mother and I will show you every single day." The baby made a small sound, and Kyle laughed through the tears streaming down his face. Margaret reached up and took Kyle's hand, and they stood together like that, a family, while the snow continued to fall outside and the ranch waited for them to introduce their son to the world. They named him Jacob, after Kyle's father. He was a healthy baby, with a strong cry and an apparently endless appetite. Kyle threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. He changed diapers, walked the floor with Jacob when he was fussy, and sang lullabies his mother had taught him years ago. Margaret recovered her strength quickly, and within a few weeks was back to helping with lighter ranch work, though they hired a local teenager to assist with the heavier tasks. Their life became a beautiful chaos of feeding schedules and sleepless nights and tiny milestones that felt monumental. Jacob's first smile, his first laugh, the way he tracked movement with his eyes and seemed to recognize his parents' voices. Kyle had never imagined he could love someone as much as he loved Margaret, but Jacob expanded his heart in ways he had not known were possible. Every moment with his son felt precious. He understood now, in a way he never had before, the depth of his own parents' love for him and Thomas. Kyle found himself thinking occasionally about his brother, wondering if Thomas and Rebecca had made it to California, if they had found any peace there. He hoped they had, not for their sake exactly, but because carrying that much guilt and regret seemed like its own special kind of hell. Kyle had everything he wanted a woman who loved him truly, a beautiful son, a successful ranch, and a future full of promise. He could afford to let go of the last vestiges of bitterness. The years passed with the kind of sweet inevitability that marked a happy life. Jacob grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Kyle taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, putting him on the gentlest mare and leading her around the corral while Jacob shrieked with delight. When Jacob was 3, Margaret became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1883 they welcomed a daughter. They named her Caroline, and she had her mother's green eyes and auburn hair. If Jacob had stolen Kyle's heart, Caroline wrapped it around her tiny finger and held it hostage. She was a serious baby, studying the world with solemn intensity before breaking into smiles that lit up the entire room. Kyle marveled daily at his good fortune. His ranch had grown into one of the most successful horse operations in the region. People came from as far as Denver and Colorado Springs to purchase horses he had trained or bred. He and Margaret had built something substantial together, a legacy they would pass down to their children. But more than the material success, Kyle treasured the love that filled their home. He and Margaret had only grown closer over the years, their partnership deepening into something unshakable. They still talked for hours, still laughed together, still held hands while watching the sunset. The passion between them had not faded, but matured into something even better, a profound intimacy built on complete trust and understanding. "You ever think about Rebecca and Thomas?" Margaret asked one evening when Jacob and Caroline were asleep, and they were sitting together on the porch. It was a warm summer night, with fireflies dancing in the darkness and the scent of wild roses on the breeze. "Not often anymore," Kyle said honestly. "Sometimes I remember feeling grateful to them, which is odd, I know, but if Rebecca had not left me, I would never have found you. I would have married someone who did not truly love me, who did not see me. I would have missed out on this." He gestured around them, encompassing the ranch, their sleeping children, their life together. "So yes, what they did was painful and wrong, but it led me to you, and I cannot regret that." "You taught me something important too," Margaret said, leaning against him. "You taught me that not all men are like my former fiancé, that some men are actually capable of loyalty and honesty and real partnership. You restored my faith in love, Kyle." "We saved each other," Kyle said simply, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses whinnied softly. In the house behind them, their children slept safely. The ranch stretched around them, built by their hard work and sustained by their dedication. Kyle thought back to that terrible day in September 1878 when he had stood in the street of Cannon City, clutching a letter that shattered his world. He had thought his life was over. He had thought he would never trust or love again. He had been so wrong. The betrayal had been real. The pain had been real. But so was the healing that came after and the love he found with Margaret. Real love, he had learned, did not betray. It did not manipulate or deceive. It did not choose convenience over commitment. Real love was what he shared with Margaret, honest, steadfast, and true. "I love you," he said into the peaceful night. "I love you too," Margaret replied. "Always." And under the Colorado stars, in the home they had built together, Kyle Brandt knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the years continued to unfold, the Brandt Ranch became something of a local landmark. Kyle's reputation as a horseman was unmatched in the region, and Margaret's business acumen ensured they prospered even during difficult economic times. They hired several ranch hands to help with the expanding operation, and Margaret's bookkeeping skills proved invaluable as they navigated the complexities of a growing business. Jacob and Caroline grew up surrounded by love and the wide open spaces of Colorado. Kyle taught them everything he knew about horses, about hard work, about treating people with respect. Margaret taught them to read and think critically, to value education and curiosity. Together, they raised children who were confident but not arrogant, capable but not boastful, kind but not weak. When Jacob turned 10, he asked his father about the wedding photograph that hung in the front room, the one with only Kyle and Margaret, no extended family visible. "Where are your brother and parents?" Jacob asked with the innocent directness of children. Kyle had known this conversation would come eventually. He and Margaret had discussed how to address it. They wanted to be honest with their children without burdening them with adult complexities they were not ready for. "My parents died before I met your mother," Kyle said, sitting down and pulling Jacob onto his lap even though the boy was getting almost too big for it. "And my brother and I had a falling out. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love, and those choices have consequences." "What did he do?" Jacob asked. He betrayed my trust in a way that was very painful, Kyle said carefully. But you know what I learned from that experience? I learned that when something bad happens, you have two choices. You can let it make you bitter and angry forever, or you can heal and find something better. I chose to heal, and then I found your mother, and she taught me what real love looks like. What does real love look like? Jacob asked. Kyle smiled. Look at how your mother and I treat each other. We are honest with each other always. We respect each other's opinions. We support each other's dreams. We work together to build our life. We do not lie or betray each other's trust. That is what real love is, Jacob. It is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day to honor and cherish the person you love. Jacob nodded seriously, processing this information with the gravity children bring to important revelations. I want to love someone like that when I grow up. I know you will, Kyle said, hugging his son close, because you will have seen how it is done. Caroline, listening from where she was playing with her dolls nearby, looked up and said, I am going to marry someone exactly like Papa. Margaret, who was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table, laughed. That is a fine goal, sweetheart. Your father sets the standard quite high. Kyle felt his heart swell with contentment. This was his legacy, not just the successful ranch or the trained horses, but these children who were growing up understanding what love truly meant. Who would carry forward the lessons he and Margaret had learned through pain and chose to live out through commitment? The seasons cycled through their endless pattern. Spring brought new foals and the back-breaking work of planting the kitchen garden. Summer meant long days of training horses and occasional trips into Cannon City for supplies and socializing. Fall brought the beautiful transformation of the cottonwoods and preparation for winter. And winter itself brought both hardship and the cozy intimacy of family gathered around the fire while snow piled high outside. Through it all, Kyle and Margaret's love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still made time for each other despite the demands of the ranch and raising children. They still talked late into the night about their dreams and fears. They still found joy in the simple act of working side by side. When Jacob was 15 and Caroline 12, Kyle received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer in San Francisco, and it informed him that Thomas had died of pneumonia at age 41. There was no mention of Rebecca, and Kyle wondered if she had already left, or if grief had simply made her absent from the legal proceedings. The letter went on to say that Thomas had left a written statement expressing regret for his past actions and asking that Kyle be informed of his death. Kyle sat with the letter for a long time, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Sadness for the brother he had once loved. Relief that the painful chapter of his life was truly, finally closed. And a strange kind of forgiveness that came not from condoning what Thomas had done, but from simply letting go of any remaining bitterness. He showed the letter to Margaret that evening. She read it carefully, then looked up at him with understanding in her eyes. "How do you feel?" she asked. "At peace," Kyle said, and realized it was true. "I am sad that Thomas did not find the happiness he was looking for, but I also know that I have no regrets about how things turned out. If you had asked me back in 1878 if I could survive what happened, I would have said no. But here I am, 17 years later, with everything I could possibly want. Thomas's death does not change that, but it does feel like the final closing of a door that has been slightly ajar all these years." "You want to tell the children?" Margaret asked. Kyle thought about it. "Yes. They are old enough to understand, and it is part of our family story. They should know." So that night, after supper, Kyle gathered his family and told them about Thomas and Rebecca, about betrayal and healing, about the journey that had led him to Margaret and eventually to this life they shared. Jacob and Caroline listened with wide eyes, asking questions and offering the kind of straightforward sympathy that children excel at. "I am glad you found Mama," Caroline said when Kyle finished the story. "I cannot imagine if you had married that other lady instead." "Neither can I," Kyle said, smiling at Margaret across the table. "Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me." "We are the best things that happened to you," Jacob corrected with adolescent literalness. "Mama, me, and Caroline." Everyone laughed, and the moment of seriousness dissolved into the ordinary warmth of family teasing and affection. That night, as Kyle and Margaret prepared for bed, he felt lighter than he had in years. The ghost of his past was finally, completely laid to rest. The years continued their steady march. Jacob grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's intelligence and practical wisdom. He took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself a capable horseman and businessman. When he was 22, he married a local girl named Emma, a quiet, steady young woman who reminded Kyle very much of Margaret. The wedding was held at the ranch, with the entire community invited, and Kyle felt profound happiness as he watched his son embark on his own journey of love and commitment. Caroline was more independent, with dreams that stretched beyond Cannon City. She wanted to become a teacher, inspired by her mother's love of learning. When she was 18, she enrolled in a teaching college in Denver, and Kyle had to wipe away tears as he and Margaret helped her board the stagecoach that would take her to her new life. But he was proud, too, knowing that they had raised a daughter strong enough to pursue her own path. As Kyle entered his 50s, he began to slow down slightly, letting Jacob handle more of the physical labor while he focused on the training and breeding decisions that were his particular expertise. Margaret's auburn hair gained threads of silver, and laugh lines deepened around her eyes. But to Kyle, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her in the general store all those years ago. They had been married for over 25 years, and their love had only deepened with time. They knew each other so completely that they could communicate with a glance. They had weathered hardships together, difficult winters, sick children, the occasional financial setback, and each challenge had only strengthened their bond. One evening in early autumn, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset just as they had done thousands of times before, Margaret said, "Do you remember the day we met?" "Of course," Kyle said. "You were in the general store buying cornmeal. You had dusty clothes and the most direct gaze I had ever seen. I thought you were fascinating even though I was in no state to admit it." "I thought you looked like a man whose world had just ended," Margaret said softly. "But I also saw something in you that day, a fundamental strength and decency that made me want to know you better." "Best decision you ever made," Kyle teased gently. "Second best," Margaret corrected. "The best decision was accepting your marriage proposal. That was when I knew for certain that I was choosing the right path." Kyle took her hand, feeling the familiar calluses from years of ranch work, the strength in her fingers. "You saved me, Margaret. You taught me that what I had experienced before was not love. Real love does not betray. It does not take without giving. It does not diminish or destroy. You showed me what it looks like when two people build something together based on mutual respect and genuine affection." "We saved each other," Margaret said, echoing words he had spoken years before. "I was lost when I came to Cannon City. I thought I had nothing to offer anyone, but you saw me for who I really was and you valued me. You gave me a partnership, not just a marriage. You made me feel strong and capable and loved. That was your gift to me, Kyle." They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The ranch was quiet around them, The horses settled in their barn, the cattle grazing peacefully in distant pastures. Somewhere inside the ranch house, they could hear Jacob and Emma talking softly, probably about the baby Emma was expecting in the spring. The cycle of life continuing. "I regret nothing," Kyle said finally. "Not even the pain that led me to you. Because every step of the journey, good and bad, brought me here. To this moment, to this life, to you." "Neither do I," Margaret said. She leaned her head against his shoulder and they sat together as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Kyle thought about the man he had been at 26, standing in the dusty street of Cannon City with his world crumbling around him. He had thought his life was over. He had thought the betrayal would destroy him. He could never have imagined, in that moment of despair, that he would find something so much better on the other side of the pain. Rebecca and Thomas had taught him what love was not. It was not selfish desire disguised as devotion, not convenience mistaken for commitment, not passion without principle. Margaret had taught him what love truly was: steadfast loyalty, honest communication, mutual respect, and the daily choice to honor and cherish each other. As he sat there with his wife of 25 years, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created through hard work and dedication, Kyle Brandt knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive. Not because his life had been easy, it had not, but because when hardship came, he had found someone to face it with. Someone who would never betray him, never abandon him, never choose her own interests over their shared life. The autumn evening deepened into night, and eventually Kyle and Margaret rose and went inside their warm home. They prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage, each anticipating the other's needs without words. As they lay down together, Margaret's head on his chest and his arm around her shoulders, Kyle felt the same profound peace he had experienced on their wedding night all those years ago. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Margaret replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." And in that simple exchange, repeated countless times over decades, lay the truth Kyle had learned through pain and proven through persistence. Real love does not betray. It endures. It builds. It transforms. It heals. It creates something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials of trust and commitment and genuine affection. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The creek burbled past the ranch, flowing as it had for thousands of years and would for thousands more. The horses slept peacefully in their barn. And in the solid, well-built house that represented so many dreams fulfilled, Kyle and Margaret Brandt drifted into sleep, secure in the love they had found and nurtured and would carry forward into whatever tomorrows awaited them. Their story was not one of perfect people or a life without challenges, but it was a story of healing and second chances, of love chosen deliberately rather than stumbled into blindly. It was a story that proved betrayal, no matter how devastating, did not have to be the end. It could be, instead, the beginning of something even better. And on a ranch outside Cannon City, Colorado, under the vast western sky, two people who had both known the pain of broken trust lived out the truth they had discovered together. That real love, once found, was worth every hardship endured to reach it. That loyalty and honesty and mutual respect were not just pretty ideals but the foundation of lasting happiness. That the heart, given time and the right person, could heal from even the deepest wounds. As the years continued to pass, that truth would echo through their children and their children's children, a legacy more valuable than any material wealth. The legacy of love done right, of promises kept, of trust honored. the legacy of two people who found each other in the aftermath of betrayal and chose, every day, to build something beautiful together. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered.